Usually I say let's begin at the beginning, but in your case, Omar, let's start at the top. Okay. Let's start on a specific date, namely the 17th of May, 2007, and a very specific time, 9:49 a.m. Where were you at that time?
I was on top of the world.
Now, let's flash back to the journey of the top of Mount Everest. Of course, this made a sensation in the world, and you got a huge amount of media coverage and all. But let's begin the journey, the climbing journey. Before we go into your life, we've got to probe the innermost recesses of your life. But let's take the climbing episodes. I understand that you, in fact, even told your father that at the age of 16 that you want to climb Mount Everest. What seed, how was the seed planted in you that you wanted to climb? You had this urge to climb.
Yeah, I think it first started at age 16. I mean, it probably started before that. I mean, at age 11, I was diagnosed with asthma, and that was very difficult for me because I couldn't really lead a very normal life at the time. I was very unwell. I used to wake up in the morning unable to breathe. It was very challenging, and my parents took me to a doctor who said that you have this type of asthma that will probably disappear in your late 20s, but if you want to do something about it and make it disappear faster, you should start playing sports quite seriously. So that was the beginning. I started to play basketball and squash.
Even though you had asthma, you were able to overcome the asthma attacks and play basketball?
Well, I started training first, and it took me a few months before I could start actually stop using the inhalers and all the rest of it. And I think it's that challenge, sort of overcoming the asthma, which was the thing that fueled the Everest dream.
That was the driving motive, just to get through the asthma.
Exactly, because when I was 16, it was my first time in the mountains. It was the first time I saw snow. I went to Switzerland, climbed a very small mountain there, and I was completely taken by the experience.
When you say climbed, you were trekking up the mountain.
Exactly.
Not climbing.
Even though in snow it was simple hiking up.
Yes.
That's correct. But I guess I was really inspired by the beauty of the mountains, the maybe sense of peace that I felt when I was there, but the sense of challenge as well. And we usually say that when we climb mountains, we're not really challenging the mountain or nature because they're much more powerful than us, but we're really challenging ourselves.
Let's talk about the sense of peace. Is it inspired by the sense of awe that you get when you see a mountain? Is it the awe-inspiring thing that gives you the peace?
It's two things. I think that's definitely a part of it. The beauty of the mountains, the grandeur of the mountains, and you feel dwarfed by these huge.
Humbled, you feel humbled.
Humbled, yes. So that's a big part of it. The other one is something else. It's something that you can't touch. It's a feeling, and I think it's a positive energy that exists in the mountains.
That exudes from the mountain to yourself.
From not necessarily from the mountains themselves, but from the surrounding environment. And I mean, if you look in history over hundreds and thousands of years back, you'll see that many people who wanted to meditate, to get closer to themselves and to their creator, they went to the mountains in these places to meditate. So it's that place has that kind of positive energy and brings that out in you, and it's something that you can actually feel and experience. Because on a superficial level, we live in a city that is it's very polluted, it's very noisy.
That is also a very humbling experience.
Yes, and there's a lot of annoyances and stresses. But when you remove yourselves from that and you go to this very pure place that is very quiet, that's very serene. You get to experience a version of yourself that's very different, one that you don't really know very well because you haven't had a chance to get in touch with.
Yes, so you got all these feelings came tumbling on you at the age of 16.
Sure. Well, I mean, I can obviously I'm now sort of reflecting back and trying to
benefit of hindsight.
Benefit of hindsight, but I'm sure at 16 I felt something different, and that attracted me to want to go back to the mountains. Of course. At 16, unfortunately being naive at 16, I decided that since I've climbed a small mountain, now I want to climb the highest mountain on earth. But when I started, and that's when I spoke to my parents about it, and obviously it was a ludicrous idea at the time, but I sort of
What was the reaction when you said I want to climb Mount?
The reaction, I think, was sort of like, well, if you do whatever you like, sort of not really attaching much value to it. Sort of, most teenagers will say one or similar things at some point, and it's not taken too seriously. Except in the background, I was doing my research and I was talking to people and I was getting my hands on whatever books I could and
about mountains,
about Everest in specific, and really trying to learn what this thing entails. And I found out that it's actually much more difficult and will take much longer than I have anticipated.
Were any members of your peer group similarly interested in mountains? Just that they have the mountain bug? Did anybody of your friends, your close friends?
Not at all, actually.
So you're a loner.
In fact, when I went to Switzerland, and it was a summer camp, and there was a bunch of Egyptians with me, and on the weekends we would pick certain excursions, and I think I was one of very few people who picked the mountain excursion, and definitely the only one that continued in that
So that first mountain excursion, that was it.
That changed a lot of things for me. There was one moment when I got to and of course at that 16 I was already quite fit, so I had already recovered from my asthma. So my fitness.
You had recovered completely.
I had recovered completely from my asthma. I was at the time I was playing squash competitively, and I started playing basketball competitively to enjoy the experience quite a lot. There was a defining moment when I got to the top of that mountain. There's a pile of rocks, and underneath that pile of rocks is a little notebook, which is very unusual because I've obviously climbed tens of mountains since then, and I've never actually found that. But it seemed that there was this notebook sort of waiting for me there, and it had the names of everybody that summited that mountain. And I remember very well looking through the...
Which mountain was that?
I don't know the name. It's an obscure mountain
in Switzerland.
Yes, very close to Lausanne. And I basically looked there and I found that I was the only Egyptian, the only Arab, I guess. And that somehow resonated with me because obviously at 16, not having accomplished really much at the time, it felt that I was in some way an ambassador to my country. I was in some way representing my country, even in a small...
How old were you at that time?
16.
Also, 16. That was so a great deal focused on your 16th year.
Yeah, it was a big year.
Big year for big year.
I mean, it was a big year for me the way I see it now. But obviously at the time it was just a passing.
But
experience.
you didn't realize it was a turning point, although you didn't realize it. I mean, this was set your path on but then. A lot happened from 16, when you were 16. That was back when? 19 what?
1995 or 16.
1995. So there's still another good 10, 12 years before you peaked Mount Everest. What happened in these 10 or 12 years as far as mountains are concerned?
Well, there was a long hiatus between the age of 16 and maybe 21. I did very little climbing because obviously I wasn't really given the opportunity. I mean, I was living here and obviously financially dependent on my parents as well. And it's quite an expensive and also a dangerous sport. So I couldn't really find much encouragement there. And I was living here as well. And the mountains that I wanted to climb were sort of snowy, icy mountains, which obviously didn't exist in Egypt. So it was really when I graduated from university and moved to the UK.
You graduated from the American University,
That's right.
Yes, and then you moved to the UK.
Yes, to start my career.
What did you study at the AUC?
I studied economics and business.
Uh-huh.
And
very far removed from mountains.
Very far removed from mountains.
I thought you'd studied geology or something. Yeah,
yes, and yes, and then I started my career in investment banking, which again is very different from climbing and so forth.
Yes.
But that allowed me the independence in terms of financial independence and the freedom to be able to choose where I wanted to go on vacation and what I wanted to do with my time. And this is when I really started to gain a lot of experience. And I worked for 2 years. 2.5 years, worked very hard, saved a lot of money, as much as I could, and I actually quit my job and I traveled for 370 days around Asia and Latin America.
You quit your job and went for almost more than a year, just over a year,
yes,
in Asia and Latin America.
Yes.
What was the triggering moment? Say, okay, now I'm going to pack my bag and go. What happened? What are the circumstances?
It was a series of moments. It started off by there was a guy working with me in the bank called Dennis, and he was quite an adventurous guy, and he'd done this cycling trip from Nice to Naples on his own on a bike. And one day he told me about this trip when we were having lunch together, and it sort of stuck in my mind that this is...
He was a colleague of yours in the investment bank? Or?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And it's unusual to find that kind of person in that environment, and that story really stuck with me. And the only thing, when he was telling me the story, the only thing I could think about is like, I really want to do this. I want to do the exact same. So actually only a few months later, I took off to Spain and took a bicycle and cycled around the south of Spain on my own. And
on your own?
Yes. And I'd actually had to relearn how to cycle because I hadn't actually been on a bicycle for 10 years.
You enjoy being on your own, do you?
Yes, I do.
You enjoy being on your own. What kind of satisfaction do you get on being on your own?
I guess I didn't know then that I would enjoy being on my own. It was very much a gamble. I was quite actually fearful of, you know, how I would be able to operate on my own. Would I get bored, lonely, and so on? But I found myself that I'm very comfortable in that environment. It allows me time to really think things through, to you know, meditate, if you will, and really to. Sometimes it's obviously great to share experiences with others and to travel within a group, but you're usually more focused on the people around you than actually the experience itself. When you travel on your own, it really allows you to really take in the experience and really internalize and every single feeling and experience that you go through in a way that's not
only that, but interact with the others who are around you,
yes,
rather than your group,
exactly,
your immediate group.
It also makes you very approachable. So
yes.
So when you're with a group of people,
intimidating
other groups,
slightly,
people don't really come and talk to you. When you're on your own, you make friends much easier, and you can also get approached easier.
So therefore you decided you did the cycling trip on your own.
Did the cycling trip, came back, and I thought that was the most amazing experience that I've ever done. Even though it was very difficult, because obviously the southern Spain is very hilly, and to cycle there is quite challenging. It was very hot. I mean, obviously made some amateur mistakes because I was just starting. I picked the summer, which was extremely hot. It was over 35 degrees, and I actually had to switch the day around. So I would cycle during the night and sleep during the day. And I got lost many times, and and so on. So that was a very interesting experience. And after that, I got really obsessed with traveling and obsessed with challenging my own personal boundaries through these endurance events.
Pushing the boundaries, constantly pushing the boundaries.
And through that, little by little bit, discovering more about myself and the world.
What's one of the first things you discovered about yourself? What made you say, my goodness, is that me?
Difficult question to answer, but I think I discovered more about my abilities. There were things that I thought that I could not do, like be on my own for.
You suddenly found that the boundaries are far.
Exactly. In the beginning, I was like, well, let me go on my own for those 2 weeks, and then it was 3 weeks, and then it was like, and then I started after going, and then I went to China on a 3-week experience.
No, that's the beginning of your 370-day journey?
No,
where did it begin? Where did it begin?
The 370-day experience began in Burma.
In Burma. How did you get to Burma?
I traveled by. Previously I'd worked in Hong Kong as well.
So there's a.
And then from there I took a plane to Burma, and that's where the trip began. And then from there I moved up north, traveled through various Asian, Central and Northern Asian countries. So I went to Nepal, to China, Mongolia, and even Russia. I went to Western Siberia and into European Russia. I took something called the Trans-Siberian train, which is the longest rail journey.
That's about 9,000 kilometers, the Trans-Siberian. Did you do the whole thing from Vladivostok to?
No, there's 2 routes. One is from Beijing to Moscow,
yes,
going via Mongolia, and then the other one is from Moscow to Vladivostok, which just goes in Russia, and they're both about 9,000.
So you did that route. You did that directly.
Yes, which is 7 days. 7 days on a train.
On a train. That must have been quite a remarkable experience. I mean, and what kind of things were you? What kind of people, events, happenings were you exposed to on that remarkable 7-day journey?
I was very keen to do this journey in the dead of winter. So it was to do it in December, January time, which was obviously the brutal Siberian winter. And the reason I did this is because I knew that I wouldn't encounter any tourists. The only people going on the train ride through that time were merchants or just locals trying to get from point A to point B. Yes. And that really allowed me to spend, because obviously you're locked up with some locals in a little compartment for many days, and it really allows you to really get to know these people.
What did you do about the language?
the language is always a challenge, but it's always, you know, it's amazing how much you can communicate with. You know.
This is one of the things, I'm sure this is one of the things you must have learned, that
Yes.
human beings can communicate.
Yes.
Human beings can communicate. Did any one person, one family, one stick out? This is a person you will unforgettable experience with?
There was an experience on that train ride from Beijing to Ulaanbaatar, which is the capital of Mongolia, where I happened to share the same compartment with which is really funny. It was a Mongolian rock band, which is, I didn't really know that rock music existed in Mongolia, let alone there was a band. And they had been touring the US, and they flew into Beijing because there's to take the train from Beijing back home. And these guys were, you know, it was a lot of fun to spend an evening with them. They had all their gear, their equipment.
And they were playing.
Yes, and they were sort of rock musicians, so they were wearing these, you know, leather pants and playing these really tough guys. But they had their wives with them, and whenever the wives would walk in, they would just act like pussycats, you know. And the funny thing is that
and these are Mongolians, huh?
Yes, and obviously, you know, going into Mongolia.
These are actually the descendants of Genghis Khan.
Yes, exactly.
Not as terrifying as one thought.
Yes, exactly. So my impression of landing in Mongolia for the first time is seeing, you know, these people on horseback, and, you know, the kind of, you know, obviously the kind of things, the images that you have as a child. And my first experience into Mongolia was very different, because I was walking out with the band as we're leaving the train, and they had brought a lot of luggage with them, and so they asked me to help them carry some of the luggage. So there I was, you know, with my backpack on my shoulder, carrying this luggage out of the train, and then as soon as we got out of the train, there was like hordes of fans.
Their fans
waiting for them. And they obviously, because I was backpacking, so I looked a little bit, you know, with a beard, and I looked a bit scruffy, so they actually thought that I was a member of the band they picked up on the tour.
Did you sign autographs?
So actually, yes, I did sign a couple of autographs, which was unusual. And then, so, you know, we obviously, so I spent a few minutes bidding them farewell and took off. But that was a very unusual start.
And of course, you picked up a few words of Mongolese or whatever language they speak there.
Yes, already forgotten them by now.
Yes, of course.
But yeah, definitely an interesting experience.
So then, from Mongolia, then where was the next stop?
I spent some time in Mongolia near the Gobi Desert, like staying in a gur camp with some of the locals, like herding their yaks and living the local life, and then head north to Lake. Westwards.
You actually lived with the Mongolian family on the edges of the Gobi Desert?
Yes.
What would you describe that? It must be quite an amazing experience. What is that?
It was. We lived in a gur camp. The gur camp is it's a circular camp made out of the skin of the yak. They have very discreet rituals where when you go into the camp, you have to walk in a certain way, never give your back to the shrine. They have like a Buddhist shrine.
You have to back out.
You have to back out.
Yes.
You have to, when you're given something to drink, you have to take it with both hands. And obviously, I had a bit of a fiasco where, you know, one of my dreams was to ride a Mongolian horse, and it was the winter, so there weren't that many horses because they usually send their horses somewhere that is more warm. So, you know, I had made friends with the family, the head guy. And I told him this is what I wanted to do. Obviously, drew a horse for him, and I said I wanted to ride a horse. So he, you know, he taking a liking to me. So he said, "I'll take you to the next village." So we walked for about 3 kilometers across the snow to another place where there was a horse. We got to this guy who was the chief of this clan, and it was a very surreal moment because it was like a, you know, very intense moment. I walked in. There was this really head guy who looked like a fearless like warrior type. And I was very, very concentrating very hard not to make a mistake, like a cultural mistake or something. And he was surrounded with his people. I sat down. He gave me the tea. I, you know, studied this very well, so I took the tea with both hands, took a sip out of it, and immediately spit it out to his face. Because what I didn't know is that they actually put salt in their tea.
But you spat it out in his face?
Because it was just a jerk reaction.
I'm sure that
obviously it was very cold and this was very hot tea, so I was warming myself, so I took a huge gulp of it and it was not expected, so I just spit the tea out.
That did not endear yourself to it, did it?
There was like about 3 seconds of silence that felt like about an hour, and then I was, you know, like a bit scared. I was just half thinking just to run out of the tent.
Where in the Gobi Desert?
Yeah, and then they all in unison started laughing.
So there you were trying your utmost not to make a cultural faux pas, and the first thing you do is spit on the guy's face.
Yes, exactly. So I'm glad they saw the humor in it.
Yes, sir. And did you get on the horse eventually?
Yes, I did get on the horse, which is a cool experience. The horses are they're small horses, but they're very
they're ponies, like ponies.
Yes, they're very strong. Like,
and they are also, the Mongolians are remarkable horsemen.
Yes, they're remarkable horsemen, and they pride themselves in being the only people in the world to ride wooden saddles, which obviously wasn't very fun.
Yes, wooden saddles, no, not funny. Yes, then okay, from then Mongolia, where did you go from?
From there, I went westwards to Lake Baikal, which is the largest freshwater lake in the world, and that's in Russia and Siberia, which was a very interesting experience as well. And then headed to Moscow, St. Petersburg, and then I took a very complete change in my trip, and then I went to Central America.
As you were sort of doing what we call in the movies a traveling shot, a truck shot of people's cultures, languages, colors, races. How did that strike you? How did it impact upon your psyche as you're seeing, from Burmese to Mongolian rock band to a Mongolian chieftain who had tea spat in his face to Russians? What kind of ideas went through your head saying, boy, this must be a magnificent world with all these people?
Yes, I mean, I think I just toured the world from city to city just in a complete amazement of everything that I've seen.
Almost a trance.
Yes.
I would say, yeah.
Very different from anything that I've been used to. But I would say that I probably hadn't actually realized how much I was learning.
Yes.
Because it was all happening so fast, and I didn't have the time to intellectualize everything and really think.
Were you taking notes as you were going?
Yes, I was keeping a journal, which is I'm in the progress of writing a book, and that's obviously part of it. الناس بترمي زي عملات وتحاول انها تدخلها في النص، في الحته اللي في النص الرخام. عملات بوزيه مكتوب عليها دعاء وحاجات زي كده بوزي، وهنا علامه المعبد بيرموها، ولو فضلت واقفه في النص يبقى معناها الحاجه اللي بيدورها يعني اتحققت، ضاعت يعني، يبقى واحد يجرب تاني. انا معايا 4 هنا، بحاول ان انا اوصل واحده منهم، ف يعني ربنا يسهل يعني. طبعا حد مش هقدر لكم بقى حد ايه، بس يعني غالبا يعني سهله ان انتوا تعرفوها يعني.
So you went then to Russia, different atmosphere, different people, different.
Yes.
Then.
Because of course European Russia is very different than Asian Russia.
And you went till Vladivostok?
No, I headed west towards Moscow and St. Petersburg.
Towards Moscow, yes.
So that was very different from Mongolia, from China, from Nepal,
yes.
From Burma. And then I headed to Central America, which was again a completely different world.
You flew from Moscow to where?
To Central America, to Costa Rica, via London. And actually, I was a complete...
And throughout that, you hadn't gone back to your base at all? I mean, or
no.
In London just for a few days or something?
No, it was just a transit.
Just transit,
yes. So this was a complete non-stop 370-day trip. And when I arrived to Central America, I didn't begin traveling right away. I actually started working on a volunteer project.
What kind of project was that?
I worked in Costa Rica. I worked on an environmental conservation project where we were working with a marine biologist doing scuba diving. To try and measure the quantities and diversity of fish in the area, so hopefully to give that area marine park status so that they could stop commercial.
But obviously you had no marine biology experience, so you were just a scuba diver, that's all.
Yes, exactly. I was a scuba diver collecting data. So we would dive with these slates on our hand, and funny enough, the pencil would actually write on the water.
Yeah.
And that was great. So he taught us how to identify the different types of fish and so on. And then I did a community project in Nicaragua, which is that we lived in a very small village of about 50, 60 people that had obviously no electricity, no sewage, nothing. And we were helping the locals build a school. And at the same time, in the evenings, we would go to another village where there's a small school where we would, help the kids like learn English and play with them and things like that.
And then, of course, and you also, I gather you picked up the Spanish language. You learned Spanish.
This is when I started
to learn Spanish.
Started to learn Spanish, and then I traveled south from Costa Rica, Nicaragua, via Guatemala, Honduras, and then into South America. Went to Peru, Bolivia, Argentina, Brazil, and Chile. And by the time I ended my trip, I was I'd say semi-fluent in the language.
Yes. Of course, the places where you went in Asia are markedly different one from the other. Yes. But would you say that in Latin America there's not that much of a stark difference? It's more or less the same. The language is the same, first of all.
Sure, you're absolutely right. The language is the same with the exception of Brazil, where they speak Portuguese. The differences, there are obviously big differences, but not as vast as in Asia. In Asia, it's every single country. It's different. Different culture, different language. Even within, for instance, China.
Oh yes, yes.
Every province is completely different.
Russia as well. Yes. So there you found a sort of uniformity, more or less a uniformity.
A little bit more. I mean, if you compare the Muscovites with the people who live in the fishermen villages on the outskirts of Lake Baikal in Siberia, it's completely different.
What forms of transportation did you take in Latin America?
Mostly by bus, traveling on foot and by bus to get from point A to point B. So the entire journey, with the exception of the start and finish, was an overland.
What, again, you've got a couple of interesting things that impacted you, like the rock band, the Mongolian rock band, the Mongolian chieftain and the horse. What events stick out in your mind in Latin America?
In Central America, there was this interesting story while we were doing the community project in Nicaragua. There was this instance when I was stung twice by a scorpion in the same night.
That had an impact, I'm sure. Yes.
That had an impact because it was quite an episode, because we were in this very remote village, and we had traveled from the village where we were helping into an even more remote village, which was 6 hours walking distance. We were helping them with a little project during the day, and at night they had this shelter for us where we had to sleep. And during the night, I felt something crawl on my leg, and by the time I flicked it, I had had this huge sting in my leg. So of course we put on the torch, and I saw a scorpion crawl underneath my mattress.
Wow.
So I went on the other side of the mattress to pick the mattress up, and unfortunately the scorpion was standing exactly where I tried to pick the mattress from, so it bit me again on my hand.
The same scorpion?
Exactly.
He must have died a double death.
Yes. So it was very scary, because we were very far away from any access to medical help. We didn't know if this particular type of scorpion was poisonous or deadly or not. And I could feel, obviously the pain was excruciating. They describe it as many more times more painful than a bee sting, and my whole hand and my whole leg started to go numb, and I could feel the numbness rising through my body, and it was quite scary. And it was getting dark, and there was no way we could leave the village to go anywhere else to seek medical help, because it would be hours before we got anywhere. So the only option in front of us was to actually just spend the night and hope for the best.
As you are. In pain, feeling numbness spreading?
Yes, I mean, they gave me an antihistamine, which only serves as a placebo to make me feel a bit better. I tried to, I was afraid to go to bed, because obviously to get bit again. So I tried to walk around the camp until the day broke, but obviously got tired. So in the end, I found the table, and I found some Vaseline, and I covered the legs of the tables with Vaseline so that nothing, it would be too slippery for anything to crawl up. And I remember sleeping on that table, closing my eyes and being not sure whether I would actually wake up the next day or not. It was quite a...
In the movies we see, when somebody is bitten by the scorpion, somebody gets a knife and cuts it out and spits it. That didn't happen.
That wasn't
happening. Yeah. That wasn't happening. So that was a terrifying experience. But what other pleasant, more positive experiences you had in Latin America?
I think just the getting to know the people really well. I mean, the advantage of traveling in a place with a uniform language for so long, that you obviously get to learn the language.
Yes.
And it allows you to have a more intimate relationship with the people.
Yes.
So whereas in Asia, you would sort of get past just the formalities of getting to know each other, names and so on. By the end of my Latin American experience, I could actually have meaningful conversations with people and really get to know what they're thinking and feeling, find out about their what worries them, what interests them, and so on. And I found the most interesting conversations I would have with the people in the mountains.
In the mountains, yes.
Because usually we think of the people living in the mountains as just quite, simple people that are remote people that probably don't know too much about our world and so on. And a lot of these people are actually, much more wise than we give them credit for. And a lot of them acknowledge.
When you say wise, how is their wisdom manifested? How do you recognize this as a wise man?
It's from their understanding that they would much rather be where they are than live in our world. They are like, I remember sitting with one guy and he told me, I was telling him, but don't you see the values and some of the things that we have, that makes life easier, that you can create more, you can do more in your life faster in little time and so on. And he was like, well, at the end of the day, I see some people from the city and they make a lot of money and so on in Lima, which is the capital of Peru, for instance. And in the end of their life, they come to the mountains. They retire because they want to live in peace, and they learn that there's nothing for them in the city, and it's a stressful life. So he's like, but I know this now. What will make me, I'm happy. My kids are healthy. They live in a healthy environment. I have a good relationship with my family. I wake up every morning. I take care of my land and my cattle and so on. And it's not like he's not doing it because he doesn't know any better. It's because he actually knows, and thus he's made a choice to live this way. هنا دلوقتي على ارتفاع 4224 متر. لسه بقالنا ماشيين، اتحركنا الساعة حوالي 8 الصبح. الساعة دلوقتي 1:30، يعني بقالنا مريحين دلوقتي هنا بقالنا نص ساعة.
وصلنا امبارح بالليل، وده المكان اللي هقضي فيه حوالي 7 أسابيع اللي جاية، بين هنا وبين فوق على الجبل ورجع تاني.
When you were in China, and you've gone through all, you went to Burma, Mongolia, China itself, then Russia. Was there any single common denominator amongst all these peoples that could say, yes, these are Asiatics, as opposed to these are Latin Americans?
I would say that with the Latin Americans, it was easier to get close to them. I mean, easier to develop a more of a closer bond because of the warmth.
The Latin Americans.
Yes.
And also, you didn't have the language barrier really as much
exactly,
as they did.
Which helps a lot. I mean, with the Asians, I wouldn't say there's a misconception that Asians are sort of more dry or cold, but that's not the case. It's just that they interpret and express things in different ways that are a little bit alien to us, and so we interpret it as a sign of maybe being unfriendly or being, and there was things, very little things, like when I started traveling in China, I would go in very remote places. And back then, in 2000, 2001, people weren't really going to China as much as they do now.
Yes.
And I would be going somewhere, and I would, let's say, be taking a photo, and I'd look behind me, and there would be like 6, 7 people like watching me. And they actually, in their culture, it's not rude to stare, because it's like, if you find something interesting, then you just look at it. What's the problem with that? And so I would find,
as they say, even a cat can look at the king.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And I would find this a bit unsettling in the beginning, and then I started to get used to it. That they're actually not doing this because they're being rude. It's
part of
because
the
they're being inquisitive, and I should actually find this, charming, and that means that they're actually taking interest in what I'm doing, and so on.
Whereas in Latin America?
In Latin America, obviously, if you stare at someone, like it's like us, someone will turn to you and be like, "What are you looking at?" But obviously, so it was easier to make that social transition in Latin America.
Now, your journey that began at the airport in Hong Kong, in Asia, where did it end in Latin America? Where was they saying, "Now I'm going home"?
It ended in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil.
Were you there at the time of the festival in Rio?
Just before the festival, but you find that, interestingly, in Brazil they tend to celebrate all year round. So
there's no problem.
So it's about 1 month or 1 month and a half before the festival, and they usually sort of have 6 weeks before the festival and 6 weeks after, they start having these before and after festival parties. So it's almost like a constant.
Movable, constant feast. Okay, I'm sure now everybody's waiting to hear about your ascent to. We've gone through your climbing history and climbing, but let's now take Everest. When the starting point? We began at the top. Now let's begin at the bottom. When did Omar say, "Now I'm going to climb Everest"? What all the circumstances went through that?
Sure. Well, that was into 2005 when I wanted to climb it for a really long time, but 2005 is when I took a decision that I wanted to do it.
Had you seen it before?
I had seen it once when I went to Nepal from really far away. It was probably about 100 to 150 kilometers away.
Yes, but that was the first time you set eyes on Mount Everest.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, and then?
And I put together, there was a group of people where we got together and we started to plan for this. It was a project that was 2 years ahead of us, and we started to do a lot of training and preparation and so on. And until probably around the 25th of March 2007 is when we set foot.
We? Who's we?
It's me and a couple of people from Britain, one from England and a woman from Wales and a guy from South Africa. We're a team of 4.
What magnetic force drove you together? Was it just pick up the phone, "Hey, would you like to climb Mount Everest?" How did that happen?
No, it was actually quite fortuitous that I joined London Business School to do my master's in business, and at the time I had taken the decision to leave my job to focus on the master's and then go back to work. So I was very much focused on the master's, so to be able to push myself in my career. And I had taken a personal...
How were you able to sit still after the 370-day journey?
It was hard.
It must have been.
It was hard, but it was a couple of years after, so I had gotten back into the rhythm of the normal life and everything. And I had taken a decision to basically not climb or do any mountaineering things during the MBA. So that was my plan. And then only about 4 weeks into the Masters, I got an email from a colleague saying that I've always had this dream that I wanted to climb Mount Everest and I'm looking for people to do it. And immediately after reading it, my priorities changed completely.
Immediately. So the initiative was not from you initially?
Yes.
Okay.
The learning point for me that we should always keep ourselves open to change, because sometimes opportunities come from the least expected.
So you got the group together, and what kind of preparations were there?
It was very intensive preparation. There's over 50 different kinds of equipment that one needs in a mountain expedition, especially a snowy and icy one. And here's some examples of things that I use on my expeditions. To begin with, we start from the lower down. One of the most important things is wearing a very heavy boot. This is the one that I used on Mount Everest. And as you can see, it's a pretty large boot. It's probably bigger than my normal shoe size. And it needs to withstand up to minus 40 degrees. And so it's a double boot. So inside, if you open the boot, there's another smaller boot inside it, which basically gives the shoe or the foot the insulation that it needs. And then going further up, obviously there's some equipment that's not here, but obviously all the clothes that we're wearing is very protected from the wind, and it's very heavy clothing so that it can withstand the temperatures. And then another very important piece of equipment is this harness. This harness goes around the waist, you know, like this, and then these leg loops here go through the legs. And the point of this harness is that that's what the ropes that we're climbing on get connected to. So in case there's a fall or anything, this is what actually holds you here from the waist. So this is a very important piece of equipment used for technical climbing. A simple piece of equipment that's very useful, but not so high on the mountain, because obviously very high water freezes. This is it's a water pouch. You usually carry this in your bag like so, and then this hose comes back from the back, so you carry it like this. The hose comes from here, and you drink. What this does is basically when you're moving all the time and it's very cold to stop, you can actually drink while you're moving, which helps conserve your energy, and also allows you not to get cold. And obviously we wear very heavy gloves. This is just one example of a glove that we might wear, but at the same time there's also lighter gloves that we wear, and even heavier gloves than this that don't necessarily have fingers, and we call them mittens. They have an entire section here for the fingers, and it makes it even more warm. And then going further up, again we're wearing a lot of jackets. Some are waterproof, some are windproof. Going further up is the hats and everything that we use to cover the head area. This is very important, obviously, because this is one of the most exposed parts of the human body. This particular one is a wool hat, and it's very important for it to have long sides so that they cover the ears. For more extreme climbs, for much colder climbs, we use something called the balaclava, which is very much like a mask, and it covers the entire face, only leaving the part of the eyes open. And it's made from a material that is synthetic. The material is very breathable, so although you see it as a heavy garment, it actually has sort of small holes in them, so when you breathe, you can actually breathe through the actual material, which is very important. And then obviously no mountaineering expedition, technical mountaineering expedition would be complete without the ice axes. These are very important. I've covered the tips here for safety, but usually they're quite sharp, and the way you hold them is like so, and you use these to climb higher up the peak. So you put one higher up on an ice face, and then you put your leg a little bit higher, and then the next one, and so on. And this is very important, because obviously without these you could not be able to actually have a perch into the ice. The same thing with your boots. You have metal claws that are in the boots again to help you be able to climb these technical peaks. And then finally, what I have here is a really heavy down jacket, and this is actually what I used on Everest on the last couple of days. This can withstand up to -40 and -50 degrees. As you can see, it's a very heavy jacket, and it's made from the inside with feather down, the same kind of material that you would use for a sleeping bag, let's say. And we were actually climbing with this the whole time. This is a very big jacket that can take extreme temperatures, extreme cold, wind, and everything like that. We don't use it for the entire climb because obviously it's extremely warm, but without this, the Everest expedition would not have been possible.
How did your mother and father feel? Say, bye, Pop, bye, Mom, I'm going to climb Mount Everest. What was their what were their parting words?
I think it was they were very worried, and of course, it's one of these experiences when there's always a chance you might not come back. And I was very, honest with them about the risks involved, because you have to be. There's no point trying to deceive them. Yes. So they knew very well that this is a dangerous thing, but they knew also very well that I was, I'd done my utmost best to prepare for it.
What was your reaction when you got the phone call Omar telling you that he is at the peak of Mount Everest?
To tell you the truth, I was just before I hear this, I was expecting at certain point of time in that day that Omar will phone. Actually, he will say either I failed or I succeeded. So I was a little bit frustrated. So when I heard the news, I was totally thrilled. I was attending a conference in Alexandria. I heard the news, I was thrilled, and I distributed all over the place.
Yes.
I was very, very pleased.
But there was a period just before you got that phone call, quite a certain length of time, where there was difficult to make contact. Was this final ascent is always very complicated and dangerous.
Yes, it was very difficult, very, very difficult. The last 2 weeks were very difficult, particularly because Omar, he was connected with satellite phone, and he was informing us about the news, and he was extremely tired at Camp 3, and he said that I'm devastated at Camp 3, and you can imagine when you are a father.
Yes, okay, I imagine, yes.
Many miles away. At Camp 4, just 800 meters before the top, he said that he's better, but he put a statement. He said, "Oh, Dad, it's now either all or nothing." And I nearly said to him, but I had no contact. I mean, he was able to contact us. We were unable to contact him. I said, "Hey, oh, please, nothing." Rather than that. Yes, I was
very worried.
Yes,
of
I
course.
was very worried about the challenge, actually, or insisting to make the wrong decisions. And you can realize that at these altitudes, people lose the proper judgment.
Of course, we don't have to talk about how proud you are as a father of Omar and his achievements. But let's flash back when Omar was a young boy. Did it ever cross your mind that he would give you a phone call from the top of Mount Everest?
No.
Of course.
No, to tell you the truth, actually, at the age of 16, he said, "Dad, I mean, one day I will summit Mount Everest." But
at 16, he said that?
Yes, yeah. This is when he was at the camp in Switzerland. Yes. And he liked the ice and the mountains and things. But of course, I treated this as just a dream.
Yes.
I mean,
we all wanted to be something.
Yes, exactly. I mean, yes, I would like to be on the moon or something.
Yes.
But no, I didn't really.
Yes, you did. How was he as a young boy? How was he as an adolescent? Did you have all the problems of an adolescent teenager?
Yes, yeah. More or less. But he had an asthma when he was quite young, and that is perhaps, even if you said to me, or if someone said to me, all right, okay, he will be on top of Mount Everest, I mean, you cannot imagine this. But his doctor said, I mean, the solution to the asthma is more training, more fitness, and that's exactly what he did. He played a lot of squash, he played a lot of basketball, and he built up a good body and good fitness.
As a father, what were the issues that you would nag him most about, that irritated you him as any father? There are things in son that irritate.
Well, now.
Well, not now. No, when he was young, yeah.
But I was always nagging him about actually career and maybe saving and future and money and this sort of thing. I mean, but because obviously, I mean, you can imagine that. I mean, there's no saving whatsoever. I mean, he and I spent quite a lot of money in order to fulfill
this dream. This dream. And you're not sorry you did that?
No, I didn't. No.
So you're there at the base camp now, ready to begin the hike?
Yes, and from base camp, which takes about 2 weeks.
You reached the height on the 17th of May. What date were you at the base camp, do you remember?
I think it was about April 4th or 3rd.
Oh, so just over a month before, yeah, okay.
So it's about 6-7 weeks from that point.
How high above sea level is the base camp?
It's 5,340 meters.
So that's you're already pretty high up.
So at the base camp, there's already half the amount of oxygen at sea level. And obviously, the more you go higher, the more the oxygen decreases, and that has a huge effect on your body, your mind.
And that's where your fitness training comes in.
Your fitness training comes in, but more your mental preparation as well.
What do you mean by mental preparation? How do you cope with lack of oxygen mentally?
It's not just the lack of oxygen; it's being on a mountain for 2.5 months. In a lot of cases on your own, or hearing constant news that people are getting injured or dying. There was 4 or 5 people who died on the mountain that year. It's dealing with the extreme cold, the very little food or very repetitive food that you eat. Very difficult. The whole life is just challenging, yes. And to be able to deal with that for such a long period of time is a challenge in itself. And the mental part is to be able to take that in your stride and not allow it to get to you, because obviously you can't keep harboring stress, because
you just focus on the peak, and that's where you got to go.
You focus on the peak, but more importantly you focus on your next step. So it's it's constantly like, I just need to keep putting one foot in front of the other, and eventually I'll get there, because if I keep thinking about getting to the summit in 2 months, it's just going to be...
You also have the team to cope with. You're a team. I mean,
yes,
and
that comes with its positives and negatives. I mean, the positives, obviously, it's a huge impact to have obviously prepared. I wouldn't have been there without the help of the team putting everything together, and obviously a lot of support on the ground and on the mountain. But obviously, as the case with anyone spending 24 hours every day for 2.5 months with the same people in a small little tent, there's bound to be always problems and stresses and friction. Yeah. And you just have to learn how to deal with it and understand that the people are reacting this way because they're under stress, whether it's me or someone else under stress, and not because they're a bad person.
Were there at times dangerously stressful situations?
Yes, many actually.
Like what, for example?
I mean, the most one I can think of is when there was a guy from another team who died from an avalanche, and we were the first people to encounter his body, and we had to move him onto the side and cover him in snow and radio his team to come and pick him up. And we were actually crossing the same section where he had fallen, and we had to make a decision whether we want to keep going or turn back. And it's moments like this when you really can doubt yourself or doubt your motivations and turn back. And so that was challenging.
And then you move from camp to camp.
Yes.
It's getting increasingly difficult as you...
Yes, what a lot of people don't know actually is that you do generally move higher up the mountain, but you do have to keep going up and down the mountain all the time.
Why is that so?
So you start at base camp, you go a little bit higher, half the way to camp 1, and then you go back to base camp, then you go all the way to camp 1 and back to base camp. And it's only the third time you go to camp 1 that you can actually spend the night there. The reason is because when you go higher, the atmospheric pressure decreases and there's less oxygen, but there's only a limited amount of red blood cells in your body. The body feels the decrease in partial pressure and starts to produce more red blood cells to carry more oxygen, but that takes time. So you constantly have to keep going up and down to allow your body to acclimatize to be able.
So until now, let's flash forward quickly to the final ascent. Who decided in the team that Omar would be the man to reach the peak?
It was a group decision. We all went for the summit. 2 of us on the 17th of May and then 2 on the 24th because they were sick and they had to delay it for a week. So we were all fit and able to take a shot at it, me and the South African on that day. And the weather was on our side, and there's only a limited window when the weather clears, and you just have to take advantage of it.
Now we come to that final step. One more clamber, and pop, you're up there. What was the feeling? Describe that feeling.
It's a mixture between a lot of feelings and like no feeling at all, because you've been climbing for so long, you're so tired and you're almost numb. Your brain is numb from the lack of oxygen, from the fatigue and everything. And obviously, it's a very emotional experience, something you've been wanting to do all your life. So all these mixture of feelings are
tremendous culmination of everything.
Yes.
And of course, you can't take a deep breath because there's not much oxygen.
Yes,
you
exactly.
can do that.
Yeah.
And then you phoned your parents.
I did. The first person I decided to call was my brother, because he had joined me actually to base camp.
He has nothing to do with mountain climbing, or is he?
No, he's been with me on a couple of mountains, but it's not his thing. So I thought of calling him first, but funny enough, he didn't answer. So I called him again, and
he didn't answer. And you called him.
No,
it's a good thing you didn't get the wrong number.
Yeah, he had actually been awake for about 30 hours non-stop, because obviously that's the last part of the climb, which is the most dangerous.
30 hours.
And obviously from tiredness, he sort of like dozed and the phone rang. And then eventually I spoke to my mother. She passed the phone on to him. And I remember very well, I couldn't actually remember anything that I said, except that I'm at the summit. Partly emotional, partly there's, like you said, you can't speak because of the lack of oxygen.
Right.
And I remember what they said to me. Obviously, they're very proud, but they also told me just really focus on getting down safely, which is, as you know, is even more dangerous than going up.
So Omar Samra was now at the peak of Mount Everest.
قضينا فترة في كامب 1 على 6100 متر، ودلوقتي في كامب 2 6400 متر، وبكرة إن شاء الله نوصل لكامب 3 اللي هي ما بين 7200 متر و 7400 متر. فوجئنا بان في الجثة بتاعت واحد شربة، حصل افالانش مات. مفيش حد شافه وهو بيموت لان هو كان اتحرك قبلينا بساعة او حاجة زي كده، بس كان طبعا الموضوع حزين جدا. في ناس قررت انها ترجع لكامب 2، في ناس قررت انها تكمل تاني.
عندنا دلوقتي في كامب 4 على ارتفاع 7950 متر. مشينا النهاردة، تسلقنا من كامب 3 على ارتفاع حوالي 7100 7200 متر لحد هنا. نيجي دلوقتي على قمة جبل إيفرست 8850 متر بعد شهرين من الكفاح والمعاناة. قدرت فعلا ان انا اوصل وارفع علم مصر الحمد لله، كله تم بخير. و سعيد جدا، بس في نفس الوقت لازم انزل بسرعة لان الجو ابتدى يقلب، مش عاوزين نقع في خطر. اول مصري ومصر الدنيا.
I think you'll agree with me that Omar Samra is indeed a star amongst us.